All right. Hello to everybody that is tuning in for another wonderful Friday night with the Coaches Corner. How are our wonderful coaches tonight?
Doing well tonight.
Doing well. How about you?
I'm doing great. Thank you. While everybody's getting all settled in, just a couple words. Feel free to ask as many questions as you would like. Just pop them into the chat box. I'll keep an eye out for that and pass it off. Hopefully we'll have time to get to everything, but feel free to ask questions. With that being said, I am going to pass this off to Duke Eliahu to get us started.
Hi, everybody. Tonight, we're talking about planning and teaching a class. Planning and Teaching a Class 101. But before we get into the content of that, really the question is, why are we talking about how other people should teach and helping other people teach and how to plan classes? And fighting, which we talk about a lot, and how to do fighting and those skills are a different skill than teaching. And there's an old saying, I hear and I forget, I see and I remember, I do and I understand. I've always added to that, I teach and I start to master the subject. Teaching is one of the best ways to improve your own understanding of whatever it is you're trying to teach. And consequently, in the classroom, because I do teach in the modern world, if I'm teaching something to a whole class of students, and some students get it and others don't, I encourage the students who get it to teach it to the students who are having trouble with it, because that helps everybody. It expands what I'm doing. It helps the students who are getting it make sure they really understand it. And so that's something. And Sean, I know you had something to add to that as well.
Muting is the thing. Yeah, so this is a subject that we wanted to talk about because we are, as a sport, this is something that we have seen as a bit of a deficiency in that we expect that members of the chivalry are able to teach and basically be trainers in our sport, but we don't take the time to show people how to teach a class. And you know, the other part of it is we need to be encouraging people at all levels to teach within their capacity and teach what they know, so not only so that they get better about it, but you know, there's always this hesitance to say, well, why should I teach a class when Sean is teaching, you know, has taught me the same class, or he could teach this better than I can. And you know, besides learning how to teach these things yourself, you also need to understand that everybody hears things differently coming from different trainers. And I could say exactly the same thing, but you're going to say it in a different tone, in a different meter, a different tempo, in a way that other students are going to be able to understand the information in ways that they just don't understand coming from me. Even though I've been doing this for years and I can continually come up with different analogies to get the point across. Sometimes you just have to hear it from as many different sources as you can before you hear it in the way that your brain needs to hear it. And so we need to be encouraging people at all levels to be teaching more frequently, to get used to the idea and just sharing your information as best you can. Obviously, we don't want people, you know, teaching garbage. You know, I often say that there's no one right way to do what we do, but there are a lot of bad ways to do this. And so we don't want people teaching bad information. But at the same time, if you have any grasp on a concept, you need to try to share that as best you can. And, you know, all of us as coaches, when we hear somebody who is teaching this class, even if they don't have the experience that we do of teaching classes like this, we learn from you. You're gonna teach this class in a totally different way and with concepts or terms that we hadn't thought about, and I'm totally going to steal those concepts and I'm going to use that and incorporate that in the way that I teach it as well. And so teaching at every level makes us as trainers better trainers, and it makes our sport easier to understand. And sharing that information is priceless. And when you get to see somebody use that information that you give them and be successful with it, it's the best job in the world.
Terrific. Tristan, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I guess I'll just add that what I'm going to bring to this evening is the angle from a martial art instructor standpoint of teaching a live class of martial techniques. Typically, like anybody would, the classes tend to be a bit smaller. They're formal, but I like to have a more of an informal and relaxed approach than a lot of martial art instructors do. And I get that partially from the number of people that I've worked with in the SCA, coaching them past their whatever struggles they may be having, plateaus, learning, wherever they start is where you want to start them from. And that's something that I've seen many martial art instructors fail at, where they just walk in and they say, I'm going to teach today A, B, C, and D. And I don't care if you're really good at all these, you're going to learn them anyway. And I think that kind of like Sean talked about, we don't want to teach garbage, but there's bad teachers throughout every field. And we want to be good teachers. And I found that if there was one like gem about being a good teacher is listen to the student, get an idea where your students are starting at before you launch into your curriculum or your outline, or whatever you're going to do, get a handle on where your students are starting at so they can relate. They won't be bored and you won't be going over their head. So I guess that's how I would frame it, but Eli put together a great outline, so I'm looking forward to getting into it.
So those are really great points. And I know, Sean, that all of us have had the experience of teaching something to a student and then them going off and eventually coming back to us and saying, hey, I learned this thing. Isn't it cool? Yeah, that's what I was telling you before. But they have to be at the right time and the right place, and they have to hear it in the right way. And I've likened sometimes teaching a piece of knowledge, to taking someone into a dark room and having a single light and shining it on the object and moving around from different points of view. Sometimes it takes someone else to shine a different light on it, to describe it in a different way for it to really work. And Tristan, I think the point about understanding where your students are starting is really important. It's also one of the more challenging things. The more students you have, the harder it is to establish a baseline for everybody. So it's one of the challenges of teaching as well. So I did put together an outline, and we'll go through that. And outlining is one of the ways that I approach teaching. It's part of my preparation. So the first point I refer to as context. What's the size of the class? Are you teaching a person? Are you teaching 3 people? Are you teaching 12 people? Are you teaching 100 people? What's the size of the class? That makes a difference, because you have to be heard, you have to be understood, you have to have feedback from students. Having moved everything online for teaching in the past year, it really changed the dynamics. So I ended up having individual meetings with groups of students to make certain that they were getting what they needed, and I got feedback, because that's to understand where the students are and if they're getting it. So you have to understand the size of the class, and also what the student's experience level is. Are they brand new? Are they more experienced, but you need to take them back because you need to address some fundamentals? Are you talking advanced techniques? What are you talking about? And then also, how long a time what's the duration of what you're going to do? Is this at a collegium and you've got 20 minutes? to cover something? Is this a conversation in the middle of practice and you have a few minutes, or maybe you have an hour? Is this going to be repeated? Is this a one-time thing? If it's a one-time thing where somebody comes up to you at an event and says, hey, can you show me something? Can you help me with this thing? How do you send them on to, so they can keep working on it, versus if you are seeing somebody at practice repeatedly, how do you work with them? So these are some of the aspects of the context in which you're teaching that make a difference in how you teach. So Sean, Tristan?
Yeah, I'll say that when the first time that I knew that I was kind of teaching in a class setting was the Known World Rattan Symposium in 2005 that me and Tristan and Branos were all at. And before that, it had been, I was teaching to one or two people, mostly my squires or individuals. But that was the first time that I was going to be teaching in kind of a class setting, in a large setting. And I made up an outline, and then I ran a test of that at one of our events, and ended up going on longer than I had planned to, so I kind of had to cut it back. And those are some of the things that you're gonna find on that with the first time you do it, it may run over. So if you're going to be doing this for a large setting, you're going to want to run through it once or twice to see how long it really takes to deliver the material, and you may have to cut some stuff out to be able to fit within the time frame that you're looking at. And I had prepared outline, and that's a class that has actually become the foundation of the fighting clinic that I do, and really has kind of shaped who I am as a trainer, because that class was the learning philosophy for SCA combat, and it was how to learn our sport. And it was it's all the stuff that we talk about with training methodology, and is become my absolute foundation of who I am as a trainer. So that's kind of how it started for me. And that was the first time that it was, okay, I'm teaching a class for a group of people. And it was the first time, but that's that's been a standalone class for a long time, and it's changed a little bit, but that was the first time that I knew that I was teaching on that scale.
And I think that's a scale that most trainers in the SCA probably will never get to. Having one single topic they cover, they do it repeatedly in different venues with different students. They get to refine. And Eli, he and I were talking a little bit before we started the recording about flushing out that type of a process where you have a structured class with a particular topic, and the idea that you're actually by giving that class the first time, like Sean said, you're practicing the art of teaching, which the next time you go through, you learned, okay, well, here's some things that worked well. Here's some things I think I can improve on. Every class, just like every fight, you'll get a little better by focusing on what can make you a better teacher. So you're working on those skills. And I like that Sean covered the first time that he taught. And I remember the first time my instructor had me teach my own class in Aikido, in martial art. And I took it on with the same vigor. I looked at how he structured his classes, where we do, an hour and a half class, and we'd go through and do, 8 or 10 different techniques. And they usually had some kind of a theme linking them together. So I thought for a week, I sat down and wrote each of the things that we were going to learn. And they each were, the techniques were related to each other, and they had certain fundamentals, and I wanted to focus on those. Then the class came. I taught the first technique, and I was watching what the students were doing, and I saw a consistent problem. And I immediately threw my outline right out the window and just went right after what they were showing they needed to work on. And within that venue, and I was working with, I think, about 8 or 10 people, but I said, all right, let's work on what we're seeing here, not come in with the outline that I wanted to have. Now, I couldn't teach a class that, like Sean had flushed out his outline from in that manner, but it was a different way of teaching. It was more of a coaching method than it was teach a linear set of concepts that all match together. So teaching can be a kind of a great variety, and any class can have a wide variety of what the experience is for the student. I think a lot of people that are teaching fighting, whether you're a group night marshal or you're a member of the chivalry or even just a warrant marshal, or even just somebody who wants to help a few other people learn how to fight better, you will probably have more of that dynamic experience where you've got, maybe you're out in a park, you got 3 or 4 or 5 people and say, all right, here's what we're going to work on. It will be more like a coaching session and less like a formal class. As long as you realize that and don't try to force that 6 guys in a park into feeling like it's a college course. And likewise, don't try to make the 50 people in a classroom feel like 6 guys in a park, because it won't fit that way. So Eli brings up some great variables. I think we could probably do 3 or 4 episodes on trying to cover, all right, how do you do a 100-person class? How do you do a 25-person class? How do you do, an impromptu 6 or 8 people who are all struggling with the same problem type of a coaching session class? There's almost more answers than the questions. But as you get to teaching, the practice of doing it will actually help you, and you'll always feel, and there's no amount of sitting down with a notebook that's going to help you overcome that stepping off the first time into, all right, I'm going to go teach. It will always be intimidating. You'll feel like you're prepared, and then the moment comes and you start thinking, oh, what am I going to do? Don't worry about the nerves. Just tell and show what you know how to do. And, I know the outline that Eli put together has got some great tips for tangible methods for how to convey what you know how to do. So I know we'll be getting into those here shortly, but whether it's Sean's point about don't worry whether you have the credentials, you don't need to be a Duke or even a Knight to teach somebody how to start fighting. Really what you're doing is not only you're teaching somebody else what you know how to do, but you're starting to take on actively learning how to teach well. But it's going to be rough. Just like the first time you got an armor, you probably got beat upside one down and the other. Same thing goes for teaching. It's the same kind of curve, but you'll get better with practice.
And I think you're right. I think this is planning and teaching in class 101. We could do 102, 201. There's a lot of variables, and each one of those we could talk about. And listening to, being perceptive about what the students are getting, what they're not doing, getting what they need, is really essential. Even for me, at least in teaching a college class, I decided I had plenty of bad examples of how not to teach, and decided I wasn't going to do that. And there have been days when I think I'm going to cover something and they clearly need something else, and I just change what I'm going to do. And I see, even now, as long as I've been teaching, the week before the start of the semester, I have the unprepared student dream. I've been going into a final exam and I've been taking the wrong class. I have the unprepared actor dream. I'm going out on stage and I've been rehearsing the wrong play. Every time the week before the semester starts, I still get those, but then I get up there and I do it. So, but listening to what the students are saying is really essential if it's going to be, if your teaching is going to be truly interactive and not simply one way, which is not really as effective as making sure that they're hearing, they're understanding you. There are ways to check on that. Have them rephrase it, have them explain it back to you, and so on. So that's just the context in which you're teaching. And now we talk about the content of what you're teaching. So are you teaching something that is general, philosophical, analytical, an approach to fighting? Or are you teaching specific techniques, how to do a thing, or a set of skills, how to do a set of things? Because the content you're talking about is significant. You're understanding the context now. Now, what's the subject? How are you going to describe this? How are you going to explain this? Are you going to use analogies? Are you going to describe it step by step? Are you going to add to it? Are you going to have somebody emulate the skill and then correct them and then add to it and so on? There's a lot of different ways depending on what the content of what you're teaching is as well. Specific, and I mentioned both the understanding the theory or philosophy and the practice, because both are essential. You have to understand why you're doing what you're doing and then practice doing what you're doing. And both are essential. So
Yeah, I'll throw in a bit there too. So when we're looking at the content and the types of class that we're teaching, it's basically for what we do. We're basically going to be looking at lecture-based instruction versus demonstration type instruction. You know, when we're doing a class on stick mechanics, there's going to be a lot of everybody's got a stick in your hand, and this is how you do it, and you know this is how your body works doing it. And typically when I do that class at Sport of Kings every year, I've got you know, up to 20 people in class, and it can be, you know, going up and down the line, you know, checking where everybody's body position is. But when I'm talking about the training philosophy, when I'm talking about the five things on each side, those are all lecture-based classes. And there's a lot of philosophy that we've covered over the last year that I think would fall in the category of lecture-based instruction, where, you know, as Tristan was saying earlier, where we're going to sit down and we're going to go through a linear process of these are the concepts that we're going to cover, but we're not asking you to demonstrate those things. We're not asking you to be able to walk away with a particular skill. We want you to come away with more of a concept.
It may seem too counterintuitive, the idea that, well, how am I going to learn about fighting by sitting down and listening to a lecture? Like, what am I going to remember that by the next time I get an armor that I would have remembered from that lecture? And this is where you have to realize that at any given time, you're only ready for certain concepts to sink into your brain. The best you hope for is that when you hear that lecture, you hear somebody, and this could be just sitting around a fire, you're hearing somebody talk about how they do fighting for 10 minutes. That could be a little lecture versus, you know, a classroom environment. But if one concept or one idea sticks in your head and you suddenly, like a light bulb, it goes on, you say, okay, I get what that means. And I think I have a way to apply that to how I do my fighting or how I do my movement. It's like planting a seed. That concept or idea is a seed that gets planted in your head. And then by the time you get into your armor, it should have started to grow, and you realize, okay, I want to try to put that into action. I want to try to put that to work. I understood it. I think I get how it's supposed to apply, but it needs to be in your consciousness to get from the lecture into the armor. Now, you can do a class where you can talk about the concept as people are in armor, say, explain it. Here's the understanding. Now let's do it. We're going to cross that path and make that distance very short. We're not going to wait a week or 2 weeks or a month. We're going to do it here in the next 2 minutes. That's a way, you know, with that particular class environment, to use the lecture part, but turn it active as well.
Yeah, and I'll throw in something else on top of that too, along those same lines. A lot of the lecture-based classes that I've been doing for a long time, like when the lecture that I start with for my fighting clinic is exactly the same lecture every time. And part of the reason for that is either you haven't heard this information before, or as Tristan was saying, if you have heard this before, you're suddenly hearing a part of it that you couldn't hear before because you weren't ready for that part of it. So it's not like you weren't listening to it before, or not like you fell asleep during that part of class. It's just you weren't ready for that, and you didn't have the skills to build on. And so now you get to hear it again. And you know, and this happens to us all the time. We're out there talking to somebody about, you know, fighting stuff, and we'll throw out a concept, and you know, we'll get the, oh, that reminds me of something Branos told me years ago. I'm like, yeah, okay, so let's go with that, So this sounds familiar coming from both of us. And then, yeah,
Yep.
and that's again, that's why you need to hear it from several different people. And that's why a lot of what we teach, a lot of those long-standing classes that we've been teaching for years are pretty much exactly the same thing every time you hear it. And so if you've heard it before, go listen to that class again, because you're going to get something else out of it.
And
Yeah, and there's two things. I wish I had a nickel for every student that has come to me, whether SCA or even within Aikido, and said, you've been telling me the same thing for like 2 years, and suddenly it just made sense. And now my body does it, it fits. And I was like, and they'll often the student will beat themselves up a little bit and go, I must have not been listening. I must be kind of stupid. And I'll always tell them, no, it takes a while for the brain and your body to make sense of this very complex thing that you're learning. And one of those is integrating your breathing with your movement. Nobody gets that right off the bat. It often will sound like, Mandarin Chinese or something. It's just very unusual. So that would be one of them. Firstly, be patient with yourself and realize it takes time. What we're teaching is a pretty complex thing. The second one is when you start to hear somebody like Sean go through his speech again, don't just roll your eyes and go, oh, I've heard this 100 times. Listen, you will probably hear something that will make sense that you didn't before, and you're going to kick yourself. And you're like, I've heard this. Why am I such a moron that I didn't pay attention or it didn't click? That's just how everybody works. So have the humility, be willing to listen again, listen with new ears. They call that the beginner's mind. Shoshin in Japanese, like absorb like you're a young person, like you're a child. Absorb everything you can, and if you don't, do it the next time. Just keep on doing that. Sorry, Eli, go ahead.
No, that's okay. I often think about learning like a lot of things, like a helix, so that you come back around to something, but at a higher level, and you get something different from it, and it keeps going that way. It's why I reread the Book of Five Rings every few years and get something different from it, because I'm in a different place. And so that's something that I also want to say, one of the reasons we encourage everybody to teach is so that they can have the experience of seeing the light go on in a student's eyes when they get something because of the way this teacher has presented it, because that's tremendously rewarding. It's a great thing to see.
It's a sublime experience.
It really is. And sometimes it takes that repetition over time of things. And it's I often think it's the combination of the thinking about it and the doing it, the philosophy and the practice. For a lot of people, your mind has to understand before your body can do it. Some people, their body has to do it to enable their mind to understand it. And it's hard to know exactly how your student works. That's one of the obligations a student has in being a good student, is understanding how they learn as well. So we've talked about the context of the class. We talked about the content. Now the preparation. So, by the way, this outline, I'll post this outline online so people can look at it and review it. So preparing to teach, and preparing to teach doesn't have to be in preparation for a formal class setting. If it is a formal class setting, yeah, you should definitely prepare, but you should, if you think about things and how you would reframe them and how you would rephrase them and how you would pass them on, that is preparation. And so I think of preparation for teaching as, what are your objectives in teaching? And keeping in mind that you may, as I think Sean said, you may, or Tristan said, you will start this and may find, yeah, you need to change that. And I've done that in lecture classes in university, where I started in one way and go, I need to change this right now because, and what I was planning to do because something else is going on or something else is happening. And so I changed it. But you have objectives. What are you trying to achieve with this class? What are you trying to help your students achieve? And then an outline, as I've done here, you know, what, and you can analyze the context, the content, and all these different points. And I'm an outliner. Some people don't do that. I outline when I write. I work from the structure, from the general to the specific. It's part of how I was trained to do a lot of things. But the outline, you don't start at the beginning of an outline and just go through and you got it perfect. I just start putting things on paper. I just, what, this part and this part and this part, and then I rearrange them and then rearrange them and rearrange them some more and refine them. And so I have a structure for the class. So at least I have an idea of where to start. It's better to start with a structure and change it than to not have a structure at all and have to improvise the whole time. And then I'll practice it. I will practice and I'll go over it as Sean said, you go over it and in preparation for teaching, say, well, this is going to run a little long, or this distracts from it, or I need to rearrange this, and there's one college class, for example, I've taught 4 times a year for 6 years now, so 24 classes, and it's so that's what, how many hours a week? 8 hours a week of that plus all, and I'm still refining the class. It's not the same as the first way I taught it. I'm still refining it. I'm adding to it. I'm changing things. And so that you'll keep doing that. But I always start with an outliner in the case of a formal class, a syllabus. But, and, you know, give yourself a structure, write down at least the points you want to cover so you don't forget them, and then rehearse it and refine it. In rehearsal, after the first time you teach it, yeah, go back and say, take notes right away while it's fresh in your head. You know, I can improve this, I can present this, I can change the order, I can do that. And so that's your preparation for it. Are there any analogies you need to come up with, visual aids you need to come up with, other things you need to do? What is it, in armor, out of armor? Do your students need equipment, not need equipment? What equipment do you need? Think of all that stuff so you're not scrambling at the last minute. So that's part of your preparation.
Yeah, and the outline is super important, especially when you're first starting to teach classes, because you have all of these concepts and you have all these things that you want to make sure that you get across, and you want to make sure that you have them, you know, in an order, so that you're not kind of jumping around to different subjects, because you know you'll start talking about something and then, oh yeah, I want to talk about this, and you kind of end up on a tangent that might have been related to the subject, but then you've got to kind of come back and cover some foundational stuff on top of that. And by putting the outline together as those thoughts come to mind, you know, I'll start talking about something and I'll be like, okay, that comes later in the class, so we'll get to that later. But you know, having that outline just lets you remember that you are going to be talking about these things. They come later and they come in an order, and that you know you'll get to them, so you don't feel like you have to, you know, jump to everything as the thought comes to your head. And by creating that outline, you can organize it. And I think Eli's outline may have this in here, but it's, you know, you build on these foundational principles. Like you start with the very basic concepts, and then you're just going to build on those things, and laying that out from the beginning kind of helps you keep from jumping around, and it kind of keeps an orderly flow to it. And also it keeps you from jumping into more advanced concepts that people aren't prepared for because you haven't laid that foundation in the earlier parts of the class.
Yeah, that's a good way to employ the outline to keep yourself on track. One of the things that can happen, and especially with teachers or coaches or instructors who open the class to questions from students, it's sometimes those questions can take you off track. Sometimes they're very relevant to the topic that you're discussing, and it's good to have that student participation because it helps them stay engaged with the topic. But there does come a time where you have to maybe respond, say, that's a good question. We're going to get to that topic coming up here shortly, and I'll answer it then. Or even say, well, that's a good question. It's not really what this class is about, but I'll stick around after and I can address this question once we're done. But as the teacher, sometimes you do have to kind of keep the drift going the right direction, or because too many questions can have it going off in every unpredictable place.
Yeah, and there's a balance. You have to listen to the students so the class is interactive and not simply one-way transmission of information, and answer the questions when they're relevant. If you say, perfectly valid to say, we'll get to that, the answer to that later in this class, you have to make certain that you come back around to it. And that's a purpose of the outline. One purpose of the outline too, it keeps you on track and makes sure that you do keep your word to come back around to it. Because if you say we'll get to it and then you never get to it, then the student that's disappoints the student. It's also perfectly valid to say that's a little off the subject. I'm perfectly happy to talk to you afterwards about that, and that's also relevant. And then you stick around and you deliver on that. That is one part of teaching that we didn't really talk about in the preamble to this, is you have to be honest and you have to keep your promises. So if you say, I will answer your questions, you have to answer the questions, whether you do it then or do it later. If you say, we'll get to this, you have to get to it. And you have to be, you have to present the information honestly as well. And if you don't know something, you have to say, I don't know. But I'll help you find out and we'll find out together. And that's perfectly valid too. Because there are things that, yeah, I won't necessarily know, but I will have somebody else I know knows it, and I will, they're somebody who's better at certain kinds of say pole arm technique. I'll say, hey, I got somebody who can help you with that, and I'll find somebody who can't, because teaching is not about your ego needing to be the expert in everything, because nobody is an expert in everything. It's about your humility in a lot of ways, of being willing to put yourself out there and share what you do know. And humility is not false modesty. It's an honest appraisal of what you do and don't know. But again, it's honest. So it's
Eli, I want to throw something
Yeah.
else in there too. You're making a really, really great point about, when somebody comes up and they ask you a question that you don't know the answer to. There's basically two kinds of trainers in this regard. There are the people who look stuff up and the people who make stuff up. And you do not want to be the kind of trainer that is just going to make something up so it sounds like you know what you're talking about. If somebody brings up a concept that you don't have the answer to, yes, not only is it perfectly valid, but honestly, it'll make you a better trainer to be able to say, you know what, I have no idea. I hadn't thought about that. And you go and look up that information later, and that gets added to that class later, and it makes you a better trainer. So don't be afraid to tell people that you don't have an answer to that. And even if it's, it could be like you said, it'll be, I'll look that up and I'll get back to you. But sometimes it's just going to be, I have no idea. And it is going to make you a better trainer. So that's very, very important concept.
Take it as a quest. Okay, that's a great question. I don't have an answer for it, but I am going to go find it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really important. And again, teaching, the teacher-student relationship has to be one of trust. I know over the many years of being a student, I've had teachers who I did not trust. And I still remember when a teacher lied to me in elementary school And I knew the teacher lied. And I remember, and it's a long story behind that I won't go into, but I remember my mother saying when I told her that, because I was shocked because teachers knew everything, right? And the teacher lied, and my mother said, "This is the lesson of this experience. Not every teacher knows everything." It's like, well, that's stuck with me a long time. And so don't pretend to know everything. Be clear about what you do know. Be clear about what you don't know. And it's a chance, if you don't know something, now you're a student again, and you'll learn. I always learn things from students, and sometimes I learn what I don't know. So, so now we've gone through the context, the content, and the preparation. Now the presentation of the class itself. And again, this changes based on the context, the number of students, the level, and so on. With the content itself, I usually organize what I do into points, and particularly if it's an additive, when I think of as an additive skill, somebody has to get this first part before they can move on to the next thing. But often when you move on to the second thing, sometimes a student will forget how to do the first thing. So I will spend time explaining to a student, say we're talking about a physical skill, showing them how to do it, positioning them correctly, having them repeat it, explain the concept, naming the technique, and then reducing that whole description to a simple mnemonic, 1 or 2 word phrase. Because that 1 or 2 word phrase, maybe it's like we spent time on footwork and foot position and how to move and how to stand. And we'll do that, and we'll have them go back to other ways of doing it and see, so they can feel the difference. Have them close their eyes so they can feel their body, that prior perception sense, to feel that. And then okay, they've got that, they can move with that, their feet are good, they're doing the footwork right. Then I'll move on to something else, and their feet will start to revert to the way they did it, and all I'll have to say is feet. And they will become self-correcting, and they'll look at their feet, and they'll think about it, they'll feel it, and they'll correct their feet. And then I'll reiterate the second point, call out feet again when they're not right, reiterate the second point, summarize the second point with a mnemonic similarly, and then add on to another thing. And so I've done this in classes. I've done this with individual students. I've done this with large groups of students in a formal setting and informal setting. Summarizing things that way is useful, because the goal is, one of my goals with students is to get them to be self-correcting and learning in that way. So that's something about content. Everybody's got a different way of presenting the content of what we're talking about here, which is fighting. And different people approach it differently. I encourage in students in fighting, squires and other students, to learn from multiple teachers. Again, it's that hearing it in a different way. When I have had, say at large teaching events, like in the Midroom, there's something called Tournament of Chivalry, lots of knights teaching. And when my squires go there and they get pointers and lessons from lots of different knights, I have them take a notebook with them, and after every meeting with the knight, write it down and say, write it down, do exactly what they're saying, write it down, don't argue with them, just make sure you understand what they're saying, and that, but write it down, and then I will help you interpret that into the context of what we've been doing. I will help you understand that afterwards. So that's just a point about content. So Sean, Tristan.
Yeah,
that's a good point. A good point on the mnemonic. Did bring up a story. I remember I had a fellow student that was junior to me, and she had a speaking of mnemonic, whenever she'd shift her weight under her front foot, she had the dancing in her background. So she'd point her toe and come up off, or the foot would come up off the ground. And so I just said dancer foot, which meant plant the heel, get the foot down flat, don't let it come up. It's, it's aesthetically pleasing, but it's not martial. So it was an easy way to use that trigger to just say, I'm not going to give you the full speech about your footwork, but there you go. So
yeah, we tend to, when we're teaching in class, we tend to put out a lot of information, and the more we do it, sometimes the faster we talk, and so we end up kind of throwing out a lot of information. And as Eli was saying, it's like we've got to we throw this information out there, and eventually we just got to come around to that quick summary, and so that you get the concept. I mean, just last night we were at fighter practice, and I was talking to a couple of guys about footwork and going all over how we do it and how we get there and all these things. And then at the end of it, it was establish range. That's it. So when I say establish range, you get to trigger off of all that information you got. And again, sometimes it's like drinking from a fire hose, because we have all this information, and like we're dying to get it out. And we gotta throw that out there, but you have to have that that context and that information. You have to have that background on it before you can get to the part where you can just say establish range, or you can just say dancer foot. And it's like we have to go through all that before we can just trigger you with those mnemonics and trigger you with those catchphrases to get you going. So we're going to throw all that information out there. Some of it is going to stick more than others, but eventually when we start saying those key words, it's going to trigger back to that conversation that we had.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say we had a question. I don't know if that's where you're going with that.
That's exactly where I was going. We had a viewer question. What kind of time constraint do you try to keep your classes to? Does the subject impact the length of the class? Yes. So it's, some of it is fitting your understanding what context you're in. Do you have an hour? Are you doing something like that? Well, then you outline, you structure for that time. Do you have, but usually if I know I have an hour, I'll only plan for 40 minutes or 45 minutes because I want to leave the rest for questions going in, because, and again, questions can be woven through to help everybody understand, because answering a question can help everybody understand, as long as it's done, as long as it doesn't completely interrupt and it's not a completely off topic. So this subject does, if it's a thing, well, yeah, then that may be, may take less time. But again, getting a student to learn a thing may take a very long time. It depends on the student. It may take, in fact, more than once. Keep in mind that I usually stick to no more than 3 points, sometimes less, depends on the student. I had a Squire who was very aware of their own ability as a learner and their own constraints as a learner, and said, I need to stick to 1 point. I need just 1 point. Well, 1 point at a time. And 1 point usually leads to other things, or usually other things with it that, so just covering one issue can take a lot of time and a lot of effort. So how do you constrain? Well, you understand how much time you've got to work with and understand the context. And then another thing is that if you're doing, if I try to think in blocks of 20 minutes. Most people can do 20 minutes of attention and then their attention wanes. Some people can do 2 blocks of 20 minutes, 40 minutes, and then their attention wanes. If I'm doing in a classroom, if I'm doing a hour and a half hour class, I put a break in the middle of it, because people can't just sit there for that amount of time, even no matter how interactive it is. If I recommend some multiples of 20, depending on the students, and also being attentive to the students, paying attention to them. That is, if you see that they're flagging, they're losing focus, they're losing attention, take a break. Don't let your outline dictate the presentation. Let it guide you and let it help you remember what you want to cover, but be flexible. So I hope that answers the question in terms of time constraint.
Yeah, the thing that occurs to me on that question comes into pace, and you touched on it a little bit, and that is certain students will learn at an optimum certain pace. Let's say you have a bunch of intermediate students. They already have a certain grasp of basics, so you don't need to hammer it too much. You can show things at a little faster clip, more like what Sean was talking about, where you can throw a number of points at them in succession. You don't have to dwell on any particular one, because there's a certain level of understanding there. As a teacher, though, what you have to be able to spot is that one new person in there that's getting lost because your pace is too quick. And they're getting like the last questions, or you'll see them furrow their brow a little bit, or they'll shake their head, or their eyes will kind of look like, their eyes are spinning a little bit. At that point, a good teacher has to slow the pace down and say, all right, we're not going to go on with this until we get this to you. We do not want to have you lost here. So we'll slow down that pace. We'll make sure you get what we're coming across with. And good intermediate or advanced students will not roll their eyes and go, oh God, we gotta slow down now. They'll go, all right, I can work more on basics. I can work more on fundamentals. You can always spend extra time to flush fundamentals out to a better degree than you have them. But to make sure you don't go too far as a teacher, to slow the pace so much that all the students are bored, like over explaining things, going into tedious detail when it's not necessary. And that's where you can read. I like the term flagging. Eli, I'm going to steal that one for when you see that students are kind of glancing around like they've lost interest because you've just slowed things down too much. At that point, throw them something different. Go to a related fundamental or a principle that's built on that previous one. And I've found that when I do classes of an hour and a half, I don't have to have any breaks, because I can see when students are starting, their training is starting to get a little stale. And then you bring in, all right, now we're going to move to a technique that's built on the same fundamental, but the application's different. The entry's different. Here's a variable we're going to change up. And by doing that, you basically chain successive things together, and you can make that interesting for hour and a half, 2 hours without a problem. There does become a saturation point, though. And this is when the mental exercise just gets to be too much. It's the same reason you just can't do push-ups straight for 2 hours. Like, your body just gives out, and the mind works much that same way. And so being able to spot when you hit that saturation point with a student, and they'll often tell you, like, I can't do anymore. My mind just is done. And I usually experience that at seminars where you go and we'll do 3 days of 6-8 hours a day, constant training, and you're scribbling down notes because your brain is just mush to try to put all this stuff together.
Yeah, that's one of the things that we see a lot at Sport of Kings, because Sport of Kings is an event up in Ontario that is 4 days of training, and there are classes scheduled from 9 o'clock in the morning to 6 in the afternoon. And what we see is a lot of people will come to Sport of Kings, and they're so excited to do all the things that they will fill their entire day with classes. And you reach that saturation point after maybe 3 in a day.
It's a few hours only.
Yeah. So the organizers of the event, Jarl Olfred, who is the brainchild of Sport of Kings, has put out a notice every year that says, don't think that you're going to fill up your class schedule with eight hours worth of classes every day, because you can't absorb that much information, and you actually have to, like, he recommends maybe 2, maybe 3 classes depending on what they are and how they're related. But as far as how I schedule my classes, I try to make all my classes, especially one-off classes for like a collegium environment, like at Sport of Kings or like a fighter collegium. I try to keep those to 1 hour because 1 hour seems like a good place. As Eli said, keep it to maybe 45, 50 minutes so you have room at the end to answer questions. But I plan on basically just 1 hour for any class that I do. And if there are subjects that are related, I'll make those two separate classes, you know. So if I do, if I do a footwork class immediately followed by like a recovery class, they're two separate things, which will often have the same students or similar students in each of those. But if it's going to go on for more than an hour, I will definitely break that up into two different separate classes. Because again, it's that saturation point. There's only so much information you can absorb. The one exception that I have to that is when I teach my class on stick mechanics. That's 2 hours, and there's no getting around that. It just takes me that long to do that because I'm demonstrating people. I'm trying to get them to do the mechanics right. But there's enough breaks throughout that class that that we don't have. And again, as Tristan was saying, we talk about stance and then we flat snap and then leg snap and then offside head. And so there's always something different, and people get a chance to try things out, and then we're moving on to the next thing. So we kind of keep the pace up so that it's not, advanced students that are sitting around waiting for somebody else to get the concept. And then when I do my fighting clinic, I start with a 2-hour lecture. And again, it's the same lecture that I've been doing for 15 years now. And the first half of it is training methodology and how to learn our thing. And the second half is the 5 elements of the fight. And there's a break right in between those. So, I get 1 hour blocks on each of those things, cover some pretty huge concepts right off the bat. And then we get into fighting and we start applying those concepts. So yeah, the time that of a class definitely matters. And the saturation point is a huge part of what dictates how long your class is going to go.
And
I think the 1 hour is a good standard. You can also do a 30-minute standard if you have a shorter amount of lower amount of content. The worst thing you can do is try to cram 10 pounds of stuff into a 5-pound bag, though. If it just is the worst. And the reason is that the pace is so fast that everybody will get lost. Like even the most advanced people won't put up with a screaming fast pace type class situation. It's confusing, very frustrating. So take the time you need to explain it. If the class ends early or you fall short, at least the students can get good, valuable information because it was presented at the right pace.
Yeah, and I there's a point in many class situations where, and I'm always watching students, whether it's teaching fighting or in a classroom, I'm watching the student reaction because I want to make sure that they're with me, they're getting it. I'm looking for nodding heads or I'm looking for engagement. Sometimes there comes a point where I see the eyes are kind of, I can't tell if they're bored or completely engaged with what I'm saying, because the look is kind of blank in both ways. So, but as you know, and it's as long as they're focused on, they seem to be engaged with it. That's okay. And yeah, again, I'll changing things up if something's, pay attention to what you're doing. If it's not, pay attention to the audience reaction, the student reaction. If it's not working, change it up. And I said audience there because in a lot of ways, teaching is like any kind of like speaking and theater and any kind of thing where you're trying to get that engagement with your audience. So the time, yeah, you fit the time to the content, but you're flexible, and the content can expand to fill time too. So, so we've talked about the context, the content, the preparation, the presentation. I want to talk, as part of preparation, I want to talk a little bit about the method and methodology, and just a few things. be heard. You adjust your volume. Are you teaching inside or are you teaching outside? Are you teaching a few people or are you teaching a lot of people? You have to be heard. If they can't hear what you're saying, they're not going to get it. And be clear in what you're saying. So if there's a clearer way to express an idea, express a point, explain something, use that. Use multiple ways of explaining it, because multiple ways of explaining the same thing can be more clear, actually, as long as they're all pointing at the same information. Be patient with students. It takes people a different amount of time to get some things. Some people are physically gifted and will get certain aspects of movement right away. Some are not, and have to think about it and understand it and work through it and repeat it. But be patient. Be patient with them and listen to the students. And by listening, I don't mean just what they're saying. I mean what they're telling you non-verbally in terms of how they're getting it or not. And then clarify what you're saying by explaining it in a different way. Practice rephrasing what you're saying in multiple ways, because that can help clarify things. So that's not here's how to do it step by step. When I mean methodology, this is there's also methodology like tell them what you're going to tell them what you're telling them, tell them what you told them. That's a methodology. What I'm really talking about is principles to keep in mind when you're teaching. Be heard, be clear, be patient, pay attention to your students. So and then I always end with a wrap up. And a wrap up of teaching includes summarizing and reviewing what we've talked about. That is part of the, tell them what you told them. Summarizing, and reviewing what we talked about very briefly, answering additional questions, but then also assigning homework, essentially drills, exercises. Okay, here's how to, the thing we've been talking about, the thing we've been working on, here's how to practice that on your own. Here's how to practice that on your own. Here's a drill you can do. Here's several drills you can do. There's several different ways of working on it. If you're working with teaching, say 3 people, a particular technique, make sure that they practice with each other and they can start teaching and correcting each other. And that's a really good way to introduce fighters to the idea of teaching each other by teaching them all and then helping them with the drills and making sure that they're correcting and adjusting each other. So that's methodology and wrap up for the presentation. Sean, Tristan?
Yeah, I think I really like how you've posed each of the phases of putting together the outline, delivering it. I like it. The presentation, you are a performer to a certain degree. Some people, I think, will run into they view it as a stage fright thing. But the thing that I really like about teaching is it takes away the stage fright, a lot of the stage fright feel that you would get, like, for example, going and being in a theater in front of an audience of hundreds of people. Like, there'd be a lot of nerves that go with that. If you picture yourself in a park with 3 or 4 people showing them how to do something, you really remove a lot of that speaking in front of other people. You'll be a little nervous, probably not wanting to not screw up and tell them something wrong. But as learning the craft of teaching, always know you're going to teach somebody the wrong thing. You're going to make a mistake. You're going to tell them, you're going to kick yourself later. Like, how could I tell them to turn that way? It was the exact opposite. Just let that stuff go. You'll learn more and more as you go along. You'll flush it out. You'll get better, just like your fighting went. You went from being a complete clumsy idiot to start out with, and you got better. Teaching goes along the same path. You'll improve with it. be patient with yourself the way you would be patient with a student. Don't beat yourself up so badly for making a mistake, because you're trying to help them, you're helping yourself. You're going to make some mistakes, and just be ready for that.
Yeah, and something else I thought about in the presentation is, as you're going along, one way that you can check to see how well people are following or keeping up or getting lost. I will always take a pause in between major subjects and ask if there's any questions. Because I mean the questions lead to answers, and it's kind of become something that I just almost habitually do between subjects, and just say, is this making sense to everybody? Because again, as people are just watching, as Eli was saying, you kind of get the the blank stare, and you don't know what that means, and you're like, it's like, okay, is there any questions? Are you understanding what I'm getting across here? I mean, do I need to go back and cover something else? And sometimes you just got to take silence as understanding. If you ask if there's any questions, and people say, they're nodding their heads and say they're ready to go, then you can keep going on. But usually there's going to be somebody that you have you get to explain a concept to, and that's really important in part of your presentation, to be able to kind of go back and just double check and make sure that everybody's on board, and that it's all making sense to you. And sometimes you ask that question and you're like, okay, well, either I'm a great instructor, or you guys are all geniuses just picking this up on the first go run. So that's where we're at, and just keep going. I will say that in teaching classes online now, that is one of those things that you often miss, that you get when you're teaching a class in front of a crowd. You do get to see the people with their eyes glazing over, or that cocked head, or that weird look on their face, and you go, okay, that's one I need to go back and see. And when you're on a Zoom session teaching a class, sometimes it can be hard to, you don't get to see that in a gallery, and you don't get to see the inquisitive look on people's faces as much. And so it may become important for you in an online setting to do that a little bit more frequently, and ask if there's any questions. And the other side of that is, now's the time to ask a question. Now you got to wait for somebody to unmute themselves to be able to do that.
Yeah. There is
Oh, go ahead.
There is something known as question reluctance. And a lot of students have that because they're afraid to ask a question. They don't want to be feel embarrassed, or they don't want to feel that they've asked a stupid question. So it's sometimes what I will do, if there are no questions, I'll just pick somebody and say, okay, explain what we've been talking about. Explain it to everybody else. And if they struggle with it, then you go, okay, that's a start. Let's work on that. And so it's a way of really forcing them to ask a question when they don't want to. But it's a good double check. It's another little technique for getting that engagement with people when they're reluctant to ask a question.
Yeah, I've noticed that students, and I had to go back and kind of notice this about myself too, is when an instructor is presenting something, especially that may be a little complex, or maybe a little bit outside of somebody's knowledge range, the student will often get very contemplative. They'll kind of really open their ears and open their mind, and they'll shut up and listen. It may seem from the outside like they're being dismissive, but actually the opposite is true. They're focusing on listening and analyzing and trying to break down what they're being told and fit it into what they already know. They're going through a pretty strong mental process, and it can be jarring to suddenly say, well, do you have a question? And I've had this happen myself, because I can come up with a million questions to just about anything. But in the moment, my mind is on processing what I've just been told and trying to sort it out and make sense of it. My mind is not on coming up with questions related, because I've not gotten to that point yet. So I like what Sean does with getting to a point after you present a body of information, say, okay, relax for a moment now. Does anybody have any questions? And let it take the time, rather than saying, okay, no questions, we'll move on and I'll present the next thing. And now the students are shifting gears from, okay, do I have any questions from how those things were presented? Again, like pace, let it take its time. There's a mental journey that students go through when they are presented with new material. At least that's my experience, both from the student side and then from the instructor side. You know, when I first started teaching, I saw a bunch of people like sitting and looking with their eyes open, and they kind of freeze. And it's a little intimidating because you're within conversation, you look at people who are actively waiting to reply to you. But a conversation is different than conveying information. And what our minds go through is completely different. So don't expect that it's going to be like a conversation where you want that active involvement from the other side. What I found with conversation is if somebody does that same thing like a student, where they sit and they study you and they only listen and they don't talk, that's a very uncomfortable conversational tone to take with somebody. Like, you expect them to respond to what you're saying. But teaching's different. You just need to get used to a different interpersonal dynamic than you would be with a conversation. Although you can learn a lot from a great conversation, but don't get nervous because the students are not responding to you. They may be just wanting to totally listen and give everything that you're saying a chance to absorb into their head.
Yep. And you know, I was just sitting here watching you and listening.
I noticed that.
So I think then, okay, so you've taught the class. Now it's post class. It's after the class. Write down notes as soon as you can while it's so fresh in your mind. How can you revise what you presented? How can you improve the class? How can you refresh the content if it's over time? How can you add to it? How can you review your content periodically and add to it and revise it? And also check in with the students. Check in with them after time, because those questions may only come up after they've had even more time to process and time to practice what you've been teaching. Now they have more questions. Well, I was doing this, and in this situation, here's what was going on. Okay, can you show me? Let's work on that. Let's see. So it might be an application question, or so check in with them and have them check in with you. I'll see somebody I didn't, I taught something to, some fighting technique or something. And next time I see them, I'll say, hey, that, are you using that thing? How's it working? And so on, because it'll help me also improve the way I present stuff.
Yeah, when I taught that first class at KWRS years ago, that it was the philosophy of learning our sport, and I again I'd made revisions to that before the first time I taught it, and that has again ended up being part of my core training methodology. Teaching people how to learn our sport, and that is something that I teach. Like I said, as my baseline, and it came from having taught it the one time and then going back and reviewing that, and what are some, how do I condense these concepts down and kind of distill them down a little bit to be even more succinct than what I had laid out. I'd recently, a couple of years ago, I went to teach that class again, and I found the original outline that I had from it, and looked through the outline, and I'm like, that holds up pretty well, actually. And it's been pretty close to what I've been doing, but it still has evolved, and the core content is still there. The same message is there, but the delivery is different. The presentation is different, even though the content and the context are still there. And your classes, the ones that you teach over and over again, are going to evolve. They're going to hopefully get better, and that again all comes from that post-class review. Like when you have the students that ask the questions at the end, that they're going to ask a question that you didn't cover in the class that you're later going to add in there. And I would also recommend, as you're teaching these concepts, especially as a new trainer, as a new teacher and teaching the classes, after you've taught it a couple of times, have somebody else audit your class. Have somebody come into your class and just sit in the back of the room and listen to your class. And after it's over, they can give you some feedback on all these things we're talking about, your presentation and your preparation, your content, your context, and you can kind of go over it. And yeah, and don't worry, don't think that you're being judged by that person, but it's an audit, and it's helping you become a better trainer. And you know, I've been teaching in class settings long enough now that you know, Eli does an outline for everything. I did an outline for the first one, but now I just kind of go off of a topic. You know, they're like, oh, we want you to come up and teach at our collegium, and I'm like, okay, you know, what do you want me to teach? And I'll just have a topic, and I'll just kind of roll through. And I'm still doing all of these things that we're talking about, and going leading up to that class. I'm going to prepare a mental outline for myself. I'm going to get an order of operations that I want to do. But I don't do outlines as much anymore. But I'm really comfortable with just taking a topic and creating a class out of thin air.
And I do the same thing with my martial art classes, is I'll basically pick a general theme or a general fundamental and then just build around it and just do that helix, that circular. Let's just keep working the same thing from a little different angle, a little different, you know, entry, different types of expressions of the same principle. And sometimes they'll come, you know, switch it. All right, we've done half the class, 45 minutes on this one thing. Now we're going to switch to another one, and off we go, and makes it pretty simple.
Well, and yeah, for folks that are watching out there, a few years back, me and Tristan taught a class in Chicago for a group of people, and I got up and did, you know, my stuff to begin with, and then he just jumped right in right after that and piggybacked right off of what I was saying and just kind of picked right up where I left off. And you know, that's the thing is, you know, sometimes you don't have an outline and you're just kind of going off of what is presented, you know, whether it's, you know, piggybacking on what I'm doing and extending that into his own concepts. It was really fun teaching that class because he and I just kind of went back and forth like that, kind of bouncing off each other and you know, presenting concepts that were related but still unique to our training methodologies and our training process and how we teach. It was a lot of fun.
That was a blast. That was a very fun thing. And the cool part was we didn't compare any notes ahead of time. But this is what I love about being a principles-based instructor, where if the principles are valid, you will see them universally across different martial arts, different, even outside of martial arts. And therefore you can match those principles up very, very easily. If you're a formula type instructor, which like everything has got to be exactly this way, that way, the other way, and then you find somebody else has got a principle that doesn't match your method, then that's where that can be awkward. Doesn't fit together very well. But yeah, that was a fun time down in Chicago.
I think what you're both describing is something that experienced teachers can do. Mm-hmm. Since this is preparing and teaching a class 101, I would recommend for somebody who's new to teaching to outline things. But again, it's a guide for you so you don't forget stuff. And so you have a logical order in which you're going to present things. Once you've gone through the exercise of writing an outline, a lot of times you don't even need to consult. You may glance at it, you may look, okay, but you have written it. Same reason I recommend to students to take notes by hand, because the act of writing something down, there's a kinesthetic feedback into long-term memory that without getting into the minutia of teaching pedagogy, but taking notes on something helps you learn it better than say somebody just recording it and listening to the recording. They're different learning styles. We've talked about that in a previous episode, but what you're talking about is eventually what teachers can get to. For any of us, I think, give me a topic. Yeah, I'll give you 45 minutes on almost any topic within my areas of expertise, right? I can do that. And give me a couple of minutes to organize my thoughts and it'll be better. But otherwise, I'll just start. And while I'm talking, part of my mind is organizing the next point and thinking of the next point and so on. Yeah, but that's not teaching 101. That's
right.
That's the
thing. It's like that's where we have all kind of gotten to, where we can just do these classes off the cuff. But for all of us, it started with an outline. It started with a concept, and it started with a lot of, do I really want to teach this? Am I really qualified to teach this? And how come that guy's not teaching this class instead? It started like that for all of us. And the more we do it, the more comfortable we get with it. And that was kind of one of the reasons that I was interested in being part of this particular episode, is getting people over the idea that you have to have, some experience level to be able to teach a class. Just get out there and, and just, make an outline so you can kind of keep your notes together. But other than that, just jump in and do it. Just go out and teach. You'll understand it better. And you never know who is going to be out there that is going to hear you say the thing in a way that I just can't. And that connects with them in a way. And that comes from every level of fighting. And so, get out there, do it, teach a class. You're making our sport better when you do.
Well said.
Yeah, good. And that's actually a pretty good summary of what we've been talking about. I will post this outline I've been using online so people can review it. We're a little early. We usually go until 9. It's a few minutes till. But I think we've covered things pretty well. If there are no more, I don't think there are any more questions right now, but feel free to post questions, ask us. And if you have questions about teaching, how to organize your content, how to present things, those kinds of challenges, ask any of us. We're glad to help.
So coming up next week
is another session.
Another episode. So next week we are doing an episode on training for non-shield weapon systems. So 2 swords, great weapons, that sort of thing. This is a topic that we've had a lot of requests for. A lot of what we talk about is pretty generic to really any weapon system. I know we tend to frame things in terms of sword and shield, but a lot of the concepts that we talk about are applicable to all these different weapon systems. And so we're going to have Duke Edmund from the Mid-Realm on with us. He's won a couple of crowns with 2 swords. We're also going to have Viscount Anton from the West, from the West and the East, and parts unknown. Anton primarily fights with the glaive. He's won Miss Coronet with that twice. It's a really great instructor on how to do that. So that's a topic that's come up quite a bit that we're going to be talking a little bit about, and training without shields.
Good. Okay, thank you. Thanks, guys. Until next time, again, yes, that's it. We'll see you next time.
All right. Have a good night.
Have a great weekend, everybody.